China offers a different view of the basics of humanity. And the first thing that you notice is the people in the street, because there are just so many of them. It is extraordinary. It's overwhelming. It's hard to believe that you can see so many people literally outside of a football stadium or a Rolling Stones concert or a football game or something. There's just that many people, all busy, all doing something. And you know something? The people in China are very thin. Why? Because they are constantly moving, riding bicycles, going everywhere, doing everything. It is amazing to see it, and just an extraordinary sight.
The summer palace was used as a retreat by the emperors to escape from the summer heat. It was divided into 4 sections: the court sections, residences, temples, and sightseeing areas. It was enlarged in the 18th century. In fact, 100,000 workers were employed to make the lake deeper.
It's hard to really fathom the extraordinary artwork that you see everywhere in the buildings. I'm sort of a carpenter at heart and have had that kind of lineage. But when you look at the detail of what goes into the craftsmanship of China, this has given me, having been there now, it has given me a new appreciation in a lot of ways for what, quote, is stamped made in China. Because you look at the craftsmanship and the work of the old and the new, and what is actually happening there, and just how much the Chinese people truly relish and take such pride in the artwork of their statues, of their monuments, of their history, of their culture. It is everywhere. It is out in front of you. And it hits you all over, because even on, for example, even the doorsteps have a small little stoop above them, about 4 inches high. And that stoop is there so that there will be no ghosts that enter your home, so that the door is up high. All these little intricacies. I mean, if you think about the construction aspects of this, for example, do you know that if you look at a normal set of stairs, every rise of the stairs is only 5 inches high? Why? It's patterned after the Great Wall. Everywhere in the country. A normal set of stairs in your home is about 7.5 to 8 inches when you go up a flight of stairs. Not in China. 5 inches. It's all patterned after the Great Wall. So you look at the construction between old and new, and it just exudes history and talent and true craftsmanship. It's really extraordinary.
The Empress Dowager rebuilt the summer palace in 1888. In fact, she used funds intended for a new navy to build a marble boat used for dinners and parties. It was lavishly outfitted with many mirrors and dining tables. It was destroyed in the Boxer Rebellion earlier this century and was rebuilt again.
Let's talk about chopsticks. Let's really think about what you need to do and how you need to move your fingers so hard and with such dexterity to pick up 1 grain of rice. That was sort of the challenge at the table when you had 14 courses in front of you and you needed to pick up 1 piece of food right here and pick it up so delicately and bring it up without dropping it. This was the single biggest challenge in China. Period.
We're watching.
I know everyone has tried using chopsticks, and they take some time getting used to. A couple of days later, we were all able to pick up a single piece of food. Most of the Chinese, when they eat, bend over their bowl or plate and almost shovel or push the food into their mouth. For now, we look very shaky eating.
One of the nice things about traveling around Beijing in a bus, I spent most of my time looking out the window and really found it fascinating to stick the camera out the window and to see little slices of Chinese life. And as you see life on the street, bicycles seem to play an awfully big part as to how they move around. And one of the things that struck us is that the streets being so small that pickup trucks didn't exist. So bicycles on the back were doing most of the transportation. We played a game. We tried to see who could discover where the bike could carry the most materials, and sometimes they were 8 and 10 feet high. It was pretty incredible. As we all finally started to get to know one another, we came to our first dinner meal, and it was at a magnificent Beijing house of duck. And they carved the duck and came in, and it was really just a beautiful feast. But it was fascinating because you really got a chance to socialize and see the ways and see the true grandeur of an elegant Chinese meal. Everybody has heard about Peking duck, and this was no exception. In fact, their restaurants are world famous. You come down to the restaurant, and this one particular restaurant had 5 stories where you could go and eat Peking duck. And sometime during the middle of the evening, while we were talking with one another and meeting our Chinese host, the chef would walk in with the duck and tell everybody, get your cameras ready, come on over and photograph it. And they made 256 cuts, and every cut has to have a piece of fat, a piece of meat, and a piece of skin. And they have it down to a science.
One of the things we learned about meeting our hosts and Chinese people in general, that saving face was most important to their human nature. You never made anyone look bad, you give respect and you get it back. As we all made fun of each other trying to use chopsticks or eating something which we had no idea what it was, our Chinese host smiled but encouraged us to try. Mr. Jen showed us how to eat several dishes, and as always they invited you to participate. Being good guests, we tried most everything. One other dinner tradition they perform is the toast to goodwill. Did I say one toast? More like several. Poor team leader Bob Haviland, he was the designated toast giver and receiver. It's a good thing he never had to drive the bus because he certainly felt no pain.
All of us as astronomers, as guests, and Americanized in using a fork and knife, really had to learn a new piece of Emily Post in Chinese. And this is what Mr. Jen gave to us. A simple, artistic lesson about how to eat with chopsticks. And it was incredible.
When you see fruit delivered to the table, it signified the end of the meal. You could continue to eat, but no more dishes were coming from the kitchen. This sticky dish was caramelized pears. It looked great, but as you could see, it was very difficult to get off the plate. Now try using chopsticks that had a shiny, smooth texture, and it becomes a game. Just when you thought you had a good grip, the whole plate would come up. After all that fuss, it tastes as sweet as it looks. Several of us tried it, while others thought they were a little too far away from the dentist to give it a try.
Ready for tomorrow. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you so much.
On the second day, while everybody in the delegation was heading for their first formal meetings, I had to skip out because the rest of the guests were going to the Beijing Zoo. If I had come, the other side of the world, literally, and not gone to the zoo and not seen the panda bears, my daughter would not have let me back in the house. I, like everybody else, as you see the panda bears, you want to hug them. You want to go up and you want to grab them and hug them. They look absolutely so cute. But obviously, they're wild animals. But you look at them, and they are so cuddly, and it's no wonder that they are everybody's favorite. One of the nice things is while I was photographing them, my tour guides, our group was walking away, and I wanted to stay and photograph these guys. The Chinese children who were there on field trips were coming by, and they were saying, and I was saying to them, ni hao, hello. And as they were walking by, they were saying to me, hello, how are you, hello. And that broke me up, and it broke us up all the time, because you would try to talk Chinese, and they would in turn come back and talk American to you. But the panda bears, absolutely cuddly, beautiful. They were wonderful.
One of the things that struck me about the Beijing Zoo, you hear about the San Diego Zoo, the Washington, D.C. Zoo. They had their chances and opportunities to house the panda bears. In my mind, I anticipated that the zoo at Beijing was spectacular, and as I learned, like throughout most of China, they certainly need upkeep. Financially, they probably weren't doing quite as well. So that when I looked at where the elephants and the lions and the tigers were held, they were in cages. And when you see Tampa Busch Gardens and Disney with its new zoo coming online, and the San Diego Zoo, where most of the main zoos in the world do not have any cages, they're all open moats, wide open spaces, you can see that the Beijing Zoo was years behind the West, and certainly, hopefully, in the future that they would catch up. But again, what they needed was an infusion of money. Vultures. This was something I had never seen in a zoo, and I've been to Busch Gardens, and I've been to the San Diego and the Washington Zoo, and I had never seen vultures in a zoo before. And these buzzards would hop down, and again, what do they feed on? They feed on carrion. They feed on rotting meat. And as you got around to the cage and you look at what this bird was hopping down to, there was rotting meat with all the flies and so forth. Again, it was pretty close to how they live in the wild. It was the first time that I ever seen this, and it was pretty impressive. Tough to look at, but it was pretty impressive. Take a look at this little guy. He is so precious. Notice when he goes by that the fact that the back of his britches are open, and we saw this with all the kids. They don't have diapers. So when the kid would mess, Mom had a quick open into his backside and could clean him up, and absolutely precious. So when they walked by, you'd look, and sure enough, you'd see that little opening in the back. They were absolutely good, adorable.
As we arrived in Beijing after a 15-hour flight and we got to the hotel room, one of the things that was discussed initially in getting there was about water. You know, the infrastructure in China just isn't quite up to certainly a lot of the other world. So there was always boiled water in a big, big thermos, and really that's what you brushed your teeth with and drank with and things along those lines. And I was kind of glad it was there, because this was one of the real precautions about, you know, making sure that you know, you took care of yourself as best as you could.
Is it my imagination or not? Look around the room, and does anybody see any dressers here? We didn't see any dressers, so we had to live out of a suitcase. We didn't have that in Xi'an and in Shanghai, but in Beijing there were no dressers. This was a 4-star hotel. Super hotel, but we just didn't have any dressers. Where do you put the clothes? In the suitcases. walking all over the place. I mean, you saw where we walk. It seemed like forever we were walking. And when lunchtime came, guess what? We had Chinese food. And, but you did get hungry. And the first thing that got there were these cold dishes that were always there. And you picked a couple things at a time until finally each of the hot dishes would come out one at a time. And eventually we ended up with around 14 dishes on the table. We went from Szechuan to Mandarin to all different kinds of dishes. So some days it was sweet, some days it was sour, some days it was hot. But we learned to enjoy the Chinese food.
Okay, so where are those famous Chinese meals? You know, monkey brain, snake, dog, fish heads? Well, you'll have to wait later on. That's another show. We ate more Western Chinese food. About half the dishes you could say that you've eaten back in the United States. Wherever you found wide boulevards or avenues, you found traffic had a method of operation. They had 2 center lanes for cars and buses, and you also had 2 side lanes for bicycles and pedestrians. But whenever you came to an intersection, that's where we closed our eyes. On most of the back streets, whoever got to the intersection first had the right of way. You know, Boston looks pretty good. Temple of Heaven, Beijing's second major architectural wonder, was built in 1420 by Emperor Yongle, and it was refurbished in 1970. It is the place where the emperor, in his role of intermediary between heaven and the world at large, made sacrifices at the summer and winter solstice every year. When viewed from above, the temples are round and the bases are square. Ancient Chinese believed that heaven is round and the earth is square. The layout of the Temple of Heaven symbolizes in architectural form the central Chinese concept of man and the universe, as the whole park is aligned north and south. The pictures from above show just how methodical the ancient Chinese were in constructing their temples and palaces to the simple lines of circles and squares. Much of what they believed in is incorporated in the precision of geometry. As we were here in China to investigate how they taught astronomy, here was one of their temples to celebrate the summer and winter solstice. To them, this was holy ground, as they sacrificed to ensure a good harvest. The Temple of Heaven was considered to be highly sacred ground where the emperor performed major ceremonial rites during the year. Here it was believed by all Chinese that all power, therefore all good, comes from a non-personal heaven and is transmitted solely through the person of the emperor. Within the ancient city of Peking, now known as Beijing, everyone stayed indoors and ceased moving to honor the elaborate ceremony taking place at the altar. The ends of the streets were curtained off with blue cloth so the emperor's procession could make its way to the temple to offer sacrifice to a good harvest. Commoners were not allowed to view the ceremony. The procession was quite elaborate, with elephant-drawn chariots, horse-drawn chariots, and long lines of lancers, nobles, officials, and musicians. The clapping you hear tells us that we are inside one of the unique areas of the temple. If you stand in the center of this upper terrace and speak or clap, the sound waves are bounced off the marble supports, making your voice appear louder. At the echo wall, almost 60 yards in diameter, a whisper could travel to the other side and be heard.
I'll say one thing about all of these pagodas and palaces that we were going to. They must have been in great shape because they certainly have to walk quite a bit. But then again, the emperors didn't have to walk. The emperors were carried. It's the peasants that had to do something. So that looks like it's about 2 or 3 football fields in length. And I'm going to get there before the cameraman does.
At the temple, there are still artifacts that haven't been taken to a museum. Here we see one of the emperor's chariots. Imagine him riding on his throne carried by his many subjects. Some things never change. Rank has its privilege. The temple was built in 1420 and burned down in 1889. Many were beheaded because of that fire, and it was soon rebuilt. Much of the construction relates to astronomy. Its 4 pillars at the center represent the 4 seasons, while the outer 12 represent the months of the year. So much to say in so little time. So please join us when we meet again as we visit a silk and an enamel factory, so bring your checkbook. See the surface of the sun as we visit a solar observatory, and the grandest of all, watch as we climb the Great Wall of China.